Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight for a town hall to talk a little bit about concealed carry and maybe a few of the other issues that are facing the state of Illinois. This is probably the most timely town hall we've ever had. Just yesterday, as I'm sure many people saw, we were down in Springfield to override the governor's amendatory veto of House Bill 183, which is a concealed carry bill. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm sure there's a lot of questions about the specific details of the bill. I'll do the best I can. I've got about 6 different summaries of it up here, so if we can't find an answer for you with the resources that I've got tonight, I certainly get back to you on that. But to start off, I thought, I'd just give you a little bit of an overview of the process that led us to the place that we are today, tell you a little bit about what the bill contains, what provisions it includes, and then I'll just take questions and we can kind of have a little bit of a conversation about gun rights in Illinois and anything else really that you've got an opinion on or a question on that affects the state of Illinois. So if we start off looking at this legislative session, it was a very active legislative session for gun rights specifically. And the reason for that is because there was a lawsuit in federal court in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals that challenged Illinois' blanket across-the-board ban of the concealed carry of firearms. And what the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals said is that Illinois, it's unconstitutional for you to say, no, there's no carrying of a concealed weapon, period. It's unconstitutional. It violates the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So they struck down the aggravated unlawful use of a weapons charge in the criminal code. That was the charge that would have been brought had somebody carried a concealed weapon illegally. They struck that down. Now, recognizing that there were a lot of other things in that law that they didn't really want to strike down, they said, we'll give the legislature 180 days to go back and come up with a law that provides for the lawful carry of concealed weapons in accordance with their Second Amendment rights. So that 180-day time frame gave us until June 9th to make a decision, which worked out okay because the legislature meets and we adjourn on May 31st. So we adjourn the last day of May. That gave us plenty of time. So over the course of session, really from the first day of session, we knew that this was a major issue that had been debated for years, but we knew that this was going to be the year that action happened on it because of the court's ruling and because of the turning of public tide and really the support across the state for some level of concealed carry permission in the state of Illinois. So there were a variety of proposals that were offered. The first, and the one that you may have read about if you remember the NRA or the State Rifle Association, was House Bill 997. That was a bill that was offered by Representative Brandon Phelps and had been really pretty similar to some bills that had been introduced in previous years that never got to the point of a vote. So House Bill 997 was a good, strong bill, NRA-supported bill, State Rifle Association-supported bill that included, really everything you need, a whole standalone concealed carry bill. We took that to the House floor, and that's when the politics began. So this was very early in session, very early in our legislative session this year. We had one day where it was totally dedicated to gun legislation, to concealed carry legislation, and I think we had 30-some amendments that were offered to a single bill. And so we sat there from sun up to sundown. We were there till, I think, 10 o'clock at night, and voting and debating and hearing testimony on this wide range of amendments. Very restrictive amendments, some permissive amendments. House Bill 997 was one of those, in its entirety was one of those. And in each case, we were able to defeat some of the more restrictive things, make some political statements about the fact that certain regulations or certain restrictions were kind of out of order on this. And then when the vote came for House Bill 997, we had a majority support for the bill, but we needed 71 votes. So a simple majority is 60. We needed 71 votes for 2 reasons. First, because we projected that the governor would veto the bill, and so we needed to have a veto-proof majority. That's 71 votes. But also because the bill that we wanted to impose would have a statewide standard, and it would preempt home rule authority. So it would preempt local governments from making stricter regulations and making kind of a patchwork of different gun laws throughout the state. That also, in order for the state to preempt your ability on the local level to make those kind of laws, that also takes a supermajority, or 71 votes. So when House Bill 997, the original proposal, didn't achieve 71 votes, we knew that something had to change. Because just from a practical matter, we needed to have 71 votes in the House, and we needed a supermajority in the Senate in order to pass the concealed carry bill. So we kind of went back and forth. There were a couple other days where we brought up some different gun proposals. There was one that was called a concealed carry bill, was very, very restrictive, would have essentially made there be about 6 places in the whole state where you could carry a concealed weapon. We defeated that strongly. There was a resounding defeat for that bill. We brought some other provisions, some proposals that members of the General Assembly had for very strong restrictions, magazine ban, high-capacity magazine bans, some assault weapons bans. We were able to defeat quite a few of those proposals. But we ended up coming back to the table towards the end of legislative session saying this deadline still looms out there. Nothing's been able to get a majority or a supermajority vote so far, so we need to go back to the negotiating table and find out a bill that can get to that level. So what they did was they appointed kind of a point person for each caucus, the House Republicans, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats. They brought in some legal experts, some staff members who have been working on this issue, really knew the law inside and out, put everybody together in a room, and they decided to come up with a proposal going kind of piece by piece with feedback from individual members of each caucus, with feedback for what was palatable, what people could support, what they couldn't support, maybe where some of the sticking points were, and decided to negotiate a bill that could get to that 71 vote threshold. So that process worked very well. I mean, it was the classic example of what it takes to negotiate successful legislation in the General Assembly. Frankly, we don't see that very often in Springfield. We have a lot of political impasse. We have a lot of people butting heads, and then they kind of go their separate ways and nothing happens. But the fact that this deadline was out there gave people an incentive to act, and it made that group be pretty productive, I think, in coming to a negotiated settlement. So with just a couple of days left in session, we got that negotiated settlement, came out in the form of House Bill 183. Now, this is the bill that ultimately passed. It passed with 90 votes in the House. We only needed 71. We got 90 votes in the House, so very strong, bipartisan. Members of the delegation from the city, from the suburbs, from northern Illinois, southern Illinois, we had broad support for this bill up and down the state. And it passed in the Senate 45-12. So again, a very significant majority, a great example of what happens when you sit down at the table and come up with a compromise and negotiate a solution and really get folks behind something. So the important things to know about House Bill 183, and again, these are a lot of the details that you may have read about over the past month or so. Some of the important things to know are really just 2 different phrases. The first is it's a shall issue law, and the second is that it includes preemption. And so let me tell you about what each of those means. A shall issue law means that we're going to establish a list of criteria in the bill. We did establish a list of criteria in the bill. If you meet those qualifications, then you shall be issued a permit. As long as you check those boxes, you shall be issued a permit. The alternative to that, or the other side, would be a may issue law, which says that if you meet those qualifications, then they may issue you a permit, or it's up to the discretion of the issuing body whether or not they give you that permit. That creates a real situation in which there's a discrepancy between you in this area, you met the qualifications and got a permit, but you in this area met the qualifications, and for whatever reason, you know, the sheriff, the local police, the state police, whatever it might be, have decided not to give out permits in that area. It would have led to a real discrepancy throughout the state. So it's important that we were able to achieve a shall issue statute, which means that the rights of people across the state of Illinois are protected equally, regardless of what municipality or county that you live in. You shall be issued a permit if you meet the qualifications that are laid out in the bill. The other important thing is this issue of preemption, and this was one of the reasons that I brought up as to why 71 votes were required. In Illinois, the ability to make laws regarding firearms fall to the state or to home rule communities. Now, home rule communities are cities that have a population of 25,000 or more and are incorporated under a home rule form of government. It gives them a lot of powers. So it's your larger cities have a lot of discretion over the types of taxes they levy, the types of laws and restrictions they put in place. They have a lot more power than a smaller city does, recognizing that there are some differences when you get into large municipalities. Around this area, DeKalb is a good example of a home rule community. So they have more than 25,000 people. They are incorporated as a home rule community. And they would have, had we not done a preemptive bill, they would have been able to make their own law about concealed carry, as would every other community in the state with 25,000 or more people and who are a home rule community. So you would have had, as you drive around the state of Illinois, you would have had been driving in and out of all these different gun law zones. I was just in the other room over here, and there's a map of the city of Sandwich border on the wall. Now, not many of us, I don't think, could draw out the city limits of the city of Sandwich on a map, because in a lot of cases, they're not just a circle. It's not just a easily drawn out issue. So especially as you leave your home community and start to travel around the rest of the state, if you were in a case where every home rule municipality could, within their borders, which you and I wouldn't really have any way of knowing what was inside the border and what was outside the border, they could have put their own rules in place, their own concealed carry laws in place. Now, the fact that this bill does contain preemption means that across the state of Illinois, no municipality can add restrictions to concealed carry of firearms. No municipality can add restrictions to firearms, or to handguns specifically. They can't say you can't buy them, sell them, they can't make you register them. There's a lot of provisions in there that say we're going to ensure that this standard is applied in a uniform way throughout the entire state of Illinois, and that individual local units of government can't make this more difficult, can't drag their feet, can't put up roadblocks, can't build walls in place to put in between you and your right to lawfully carry a concealed weapon. So both of those, I think, were very important things. They're things we fought very hard for, and things that really, when you stop and think about them, make a lot of common sense. Because the idea here is to create a law that people can understand, that they can comply with, that somebody in good faith isn't going to accidentally break the law while meaning to comply with it. And so we tried to look at a lot of those aspects there, knowing that this is something that's really going to affect the state and is going to affect you as you travel across the state of Illinois. So if we just go over a couple of the kind of broad level provisions of the bill, then we'll get into a few questions. In general, the license lasts for 5 years. You'll be able to apply for a license, lasts for 5 years, and costs $150. It's issued by the state police, and some of the qualifications include you must be 21 years of age or older, and you either must have a FOID card right now or be eligible for a FOID card right now. And so you know that there are some restrictions on FOID cards right now if you have a history of violent crimes and things like that. You've got to have a FOID card or be eligible for one in order to get a concealed carry permit. You also have to have 16 hours of training, including some live fire exercise. But if you've been trained in another state, or if you're a member of the military, if you're a veteran, you can have up to 8 hours of credit applied towards that 16-hour standard. So if you've got a concealed carry permit from another state, and I know a lot of folks did, we were down in Springfield during the negotiation for this, and people would take out and say, they got a Florida concealed carry permit, and they've got a Utah concealed carry permit, and a Wisconsin, or whatever it might be, show a variety of licenses here. You can, if you've been trained in another state, receive up to 8 hours credit there, so at least half of your training is already done. If you've done some training in another state, you just go complete the course of that, complete another 8 hours in the state of Illinois, and you'll be issued a permit there. Non-residents, there's a $300 fee for a non-resident to come through, but the law does allow somebody who has a permit in their home state to pass through Illinois without violating the law. So you can drive it, you can drive through, if you're coming from Wisconsin to Indiana, and you've got a concealed carry permit, you can pass through Illinois legally without needing to get another permit. Once you submit your application to the state police, there's 90 days, the application has to be processed within 90 days. So this will probably be a little bit more of an issue as the first rush of people kind of comes to make the application for this. But ideally, over the longer term, they're not going to be able to hold your license or your permit indefinitely, hold your application indefinitely. We've got a time frame on there. They have to take timely action on this. And again, it might be really pushing the limits of the resources at the beginning, because I anticipate a significant application pool in the beginning. But over time, I think this will be a little quicker than the 90-day limit that we have. The bill also requires that the application be available within 180 days of the passage of the law. So yesterday we overrode the governor's veto of it. It became law yesterday. So within the clock started ticking. Within 180 days of yesterday, that's the absolute limit, the absolute last day that the state police have in order to put together this application. And then you can make your application probably in an online way to apply for concealed carry. If we look at some of the regulatory aspects of the bill, first, another important provision here is that the bill does restrict carrying in, I think it's 23 different locations things like schools, hospitals, nursing homes, government buildings, some fairly standard exemptions for concealed carry of weapons. But importantly, it does include the provision that it designates your car, your vehicle, as a safe harbor. And the reason that's important is because, let's say you're carrying one day and you're driving around town and you've got to go drop off something at a school, right? So when you pull onto the school property, we don't want you to be in violation of the law because you had to make this unscheduled errand or because you had to go to a place where you didn't expect to go. But we also don't want to make you think at the beginning of the day, okay, am I going to go to any place that's prohibited zone here? And so I've got to leave my firearm home all day long because I'm going to go to one place at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that's a prohibited area. So your car is a safe harbor, and what that means is when you come onto the grounds of a prohibited carry place, so City Hall for example, is you couldn't carry a concealed weapon in here. But you can park in a parking lot outside City Hall, even if it's on City Hall property, and leave your firearm in your car, and that's okay. So you're not in violation of coming into a prohibited zone if you stow your firearm, in a glove box, in a console, in your trunk, in a locked firearm box inside your car on those properties. So you come to a school, you can take out your firearm, put it in the console, lock your car, go inside, be okay, and not be in violation there. So it's an important provision because it means that you can carry it with some confidence throughout the course of the day, knowing that if you're making an unscheduled stop in a prohibited area, you're not going to suddenly be in violation of the law. There are some prohibitions for carrying on private property in which the owner has decided that you can't carry on their private property. So I think this is an important provision because it's also important to respect the property rights of property owners. And so if you're going to a private property location and they decide they don't want people to carry a concealed weapon on their property, they can do that. They post a sign that lets you know that you can't carry there, and you're required to leave that in your car, to leave a firearm in your car, or to make other accommodations for that in order to be in compliance there. There's some common sense things I think about. You can't carry under the influence of alcohol. It's the same standard as driving under the influence of alcohol. So if you're above a .08 or over, it's a DUI. If you're above .08 or over, it's carrying under the influence, and that's a violation of the law too. Recognizing that when people are under the influence of alcohol, they might not make wise decisions sometimes. You're also prohibited from carrying in a facility, and this is kind of the technical way of saying it, but carrying an establishment that derives 50% or more of its income from the sale of alcohol. And that essentially is a way to segment out and say, you can't carry in a bar, you can't carry in a straight bar, tavern, pub, whatever, but you can carry in a restaurant. As long as we're not expecting you to know whether they get 50 or 51% of their income from the sale of alcohol, so that's what post a sign that lets you know. But it was a way that we could say, again, we recognize that guns and alcohol don't always mix, and that we need to make some safeguard measures in place there. But knowing that there's a heck of a lot of places around that sell alcohol in some capacity, a gas station, a restaurant, a lot of places that sell alcohol, and we didn't want to say if they sell any alcohol at all, you can't carry in there because that closes down a heck of a lot of locations. So we said this is an exemption to say you can't carry in a bar, you can carry in a restaurant or in a store that sells alcohol. Again, as long as you're not yourself under the influence of alcohol. Some of the areas that the carrying of firearms would be prohibited, we mentioned a few of these before: schools, government buildings, airports. There's playgrounds, municipal parks, prisons, some things like that. Again, a lot of these are pretty common sense and are exemptions that exist in most states that do offer concealed carry laws before this. I mentioned that the license lasts for 5 years, $150 for 5 years, and then after that there's a renewal. Upon renewal, you don't have to go through the same level of training that you did in the beginning, 16 hours of training in the beginning, but in order to renew, you only need 3 hours of training. So 3 hours of training every 5 years helps, I think, kind of keep that cost down, because we know that in addition to the license application fee, there'll also be a fee for the training of some sort. The trainers now will be licensed by the Illinois State Police, so they'll establish the qualifications for that and authorize individuals to be certified trainers under the concealed carry law. there are a couple other, some other details and some kind of technicality things about what are prohibited zones and what aren't prohibited zones. If you apply for a concealed carry permit, you're going to learn that in your class. So I don't want to go through all that tonight. Unfortunately, this won't count as part of your 16 hours towards the training requirement. I'm not a licensed trainer yet, but that's just something to keep in mind, is that there are some other kind of technicalities in this that you'll learn, I think, as you go through the process. So this is an interesting time. Yesterday was the day that after we passed this bill, as I just described to you, and after it was negotiated, after it got significant majorities in both the House and the Senate towards the end of session in May, the governor really drug his feet on what he was going to do about the bill. Really took a long time. About 2 weeks ago now, issued an amendatory veto of the bill. An amendatory veto is the governor's way of saying he's not going to veto the bill outright, not going to kill the bill, but he makes a series of changes to it. So he made actually a series of 10 different changes to the bill and made it dramatically more restrictive. Eliminated a number of rights that were important to us in the bill, eliminated some preemption rights, would have led to a kind of a confusing patchwork of gun laws across the state, flipped some things completely around, flipped some sign posting requirements. One of the changes he made would have said that you could only carry in a place that put a sign in the window that said you could carry there. And if they didn't have that sign, then every place was off limits. So some things where he dramatically flipped the original intent of the bill and took it to the opposite direction. Now again, we talked about this. This was a bill that was negotiated in a bipartisan way with people from the city, from the suburbs, northern Illinois, southern Illinois. The governor wasn't active during those parts of negotiation. He didn't come to the table and say, here's the things that I'd like to see in the bill. He didn't come to the table and lay out what he thought was a fair compromise or try to influence the direction of our negotiation at all. He just waited until we had passed this bill with huge majorities and then bring it back and do an amendatory veto with the clock ticking on this deadline imposed by the federal court system, and sent it back to the legislature and said, here's the way I think things should be. So we came back into session yesterday morning, both the House and the Senate, and we, in the House at least, overrode the governor's veto with no debate immediately, with 6 more votes than we actually needed to override the debate, override the veto. So it happened very quickly. I was very confident going down to Springfield yesterday that we were going to be able to override the veto because of how much work had gone into building this fair bill in the beginning. And we were able to do that. The Senate then took up the measure too and resoundingly overrode the governor's veto. And so when that happens, the governor didn't sign the bill, but both chambers voted to override. It becomes law immediately. So immediately upon that Senate vote yesterday, the second vote that happened, the bill became law. And it's for the first time we can stand in one of these meetings and say that the state of Illinois has a concealed carry law on the books, that all 50 states in the United States now have a concealed carry law on the books. We've been waiting for a long time, I think, to hear that and to say that, and we made a big step yesterday in gun owners' rights in the state of Illinois. So I'd be happy to take any questions that you've got about the process or about where we go from here. There are still some things we're trying to figure out. This is about a 24-hour old law, so we're still working through a few provisions of this. And I know there's some changes today, but I'm happy to help out and answer anything I can.